Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm here to continue reading Protector of the Small, The First Test. This book is by Tamora Pierce, and it is published by RandomHouse, New York. We're going to pick up where we left off with Chapter 2, Not So Welcome. Wilden of Caval nodded to Baron Pierce, but his eyes were on Kell. He looked her over from top to toe, taking in every wrinkle and spot in her tunic and breeches, and a fading bruise around her eye. Cal met his gaze squarely. The training master was handsome, for all that he was completely bald on top. He wore what was left of his light brown hair, cropped very short. A scar, so red and puffy it had to be recent, ran from the corner of his eye across his right temple to dig a track through his hair to his ear. His right arm rested in a sling. His eyes were brown, his mouth was wide, his chin was square with a hint of a cleft in it. His big hands were marked with scars. He was dressed simply in a pale blue tunic, a white shirt, and dark blue hose. She couldn't see his feet behind the big desk, but she suspected that his shoes were as sensible as the rest of him. Even the Amanis would say that he's got too much stone in him, she thought, looking at the scuffed toes of her boots. He needs water to balance his nature. Peering through her lashes at the training master, she added, "Lots of water, a century or two of it, maybe." Wilden drummed his fingers on his desktop. At last he smiled tightly. "Be seated, please, both of you." Kell and her father obeyed. Wilden took his own seat. "Well, Killadry, is it?" She nodded. "You understand that you are here on sufferance. You have a year in which to prove that you can keep up with the boys. If you do not satisfy me on that count, you will go home." He's never said that to any boy, Kell thought, glad that her face would not show her resentment. He shouldn't be saying it to me. She kept her voice polite as she answered, "Yes, my lord. You will get no special privileges or treatment despite your sex." Wilden's eyes were stony. "I will not tolerate flirtations. If there is a boy in your room, the door must be open. The same is true as if you are in a boy's room. Should you disobey, you will be sent home immediately." Kell met his eyes. "Yes, sir." She was talkative enough with her family, but not with outsiders. The chill that rose from Wilden made her even quieter. Pierce shifted in his seat. "My daughter is only 10, Lord Wilden. She's a bit young for that sort of thing." "My experience with females is that they begin early," the training master said flatly. He ran a blunt-tipped figure down a piece of paper. "It says that you claim no magical gift," stated Lord Wilden. "Is that so?" Kell nodded. Lord Wilden put down the paper and leaned forward, clasping his hands on his neatly ordered desk. "In your father's day, the royal household always dined in the banquet hall. Now, our royal family dines privately for the most part. On great holidays and on special occasions, the feasts are held with the sovereigns, nobles, and guests in attendance. The pages are required to serve at such a banquet. Also, you are required to run any errands for any lord or lady who asks." Has she a servant with her?" asked Kell's father. "No," Pierce replied. "Very well, palace staff will tend to her rooms. Have you any questions?" Wilden asked Kell. "Yes," she wanted to say. "Why won't you treat me like you treat the boys? Why can't you be fair?" She kept it to herself. Growing up in a diplomat's house, she had learned how to read people. A good look at Wilden's square, stubborn face with its hard jaw had told her that words would mean nothing to this man. Kell would have to prove to him that she was as good as any boy, and she would. "No questions, my lord," she told him quietly. "There's a chamber across the hall for your farewells," Wilden told Pierce. "Selma will come for Killadry and guide her to her assigned room. No doubt her baggage is already there." He looked at Kell. "Unpack your things neatly. When the supper bell rings, stand at the hall with the new boys. Sponsors, older pages, who show the new ones how things are done, must be chosen before we go down to the mess hall." After Kell said goodbye to her father, she found Selma waiting for her in the hall. The woman was short and thin, with frizzy brown hair and large, dark eyes. She wore the palace uniform for women servants, a dark skirt and a white blouse. A large ring laden with keys hung from her belt. As she took Kell to her new room, Selma asked if Kell had brought a personal servant. When the girl replied that she hadn't, Selma told her, "In that case, I'll assign a servant to you. We bring you hot water for wash-up and get your fire going in the morning. We also do your laundry and mending, make beds, sweep, and so on. If you play any tricks on the servants, you'll do your laundry and bed making for the rest of the year. It's not our job to look after weapons, equipment, or armor, mind. That's what you're here to learn. She briskly led the way through one long hallway as she talked. Now they passed rows of doors. Each bore a piece of slate with a name written in chalk. That's my room, Salma explained, pointing. The ground floor here is the page's wing. Squire's the next floor up. If you need supplies or special cleaning and sewing, or if you're ill, come to me. Kel looked at her curiously. My brothers didn't mention you. Timon Greendale, our headman, reorganized service here 6 years ago, Selma replied. I was brought in 5 years back, just in time to meet your brother Cornel. Don't worry, I won't hold it against you. Kel smiled wryly. Cornel had that effect on people. Salma halted in front of the last door in the hall. There was no name written on the slate. This is your room, she remarked. I told the men to put your things here. She brushed the slate with her fingertips. Your name has been washed off. I'll have to get my chalk. You may as well unpack. Thank you, Kel said. No need to thank me, was Selma's calm reply. I do what they pay me to do. She hesitated and then added, if you need anything, even if it's just a sympathetic ear, tell me. She rested a warm hand on Kel's shoulder for a moment and then walked away. Entering her room, Kel shut the door. When she turned, a gasp escaped before she locked her lips. She surveyed the damage. The narrow bed was overturned. Mattress, sheets, and blankets were strewn everywhere. The drapes lay on the floor and the shutters hung open. 2 chairs, a bookcase, a pair of night tables, and an oak clothes press were also upended. The desk must have been too heavy for such a treatment, but its drawers had been dumped onto the floor. Her packs were opened and their contents tumbled out. Somebody had used her practice glaive to slash and pull down the wall hangings. On the plaster wall she saw written, No girls, go home, you won't last. Kel took deep breaths until the storm of hurt and anger that she felt was under control. Once she was done, she began to clean up. The first thing she checked was the small wooden box containing her collection of Yamani porcelain lucky cats. She had a dozen or so, each a different size and color, each sitting with one paw upraised. The box itself was dented on one corner, but its contents were safe. Her mother had packed each cat in a handkerchief to keep it from breaking. That was something at least, Kel thought. But what about next time? Maybe she ought to ship them home. As she gathered up her clothes, she heard a knock. She opened her door a crack. It was Salma. The minute the woman saw her face, she knew something was wrong. Open, she commanded. Kel let her in and shut the door. You were warned that this kind of thing might happen? Salma asked finally. Kel nodded. I'm cleaning up. I told you, it's your job to perform a warrior's tasks. We do this kind of work, Salma replied. Leave this to me. By the time you come back from supper, it will be as good as new. Are you going to change clothes? Kel nodded. Why don't you do that? It's nearly time for you to wait outside. I'll need your key once you're done in here. Kel scooped up the things she needed and walked to the next room. Small and bare, it served as a dressing room and a bathroom. The privy was behind a door, set in the wall. There was little in here to destroy, but the mirror and privy were soaped. Kel shut the door. Before she had seen her room, she had planned to wear a tunic and breeches, as she had for the journey. She thought that if she were to train as a boy, she had to dress like one. They were also more comfortable. Now she felt differently. She was a girl, she had nothing to be ashamed of, and they had better learn that first thing. The best way to remind them was to dress at least part of the time, as a girl. Stripping off her travel-stained clothes, she pulled on a yellow linen shift and topped it with her second-best dress, a fawn brown cotton that looked well against the yellow. She removed her boots and put on white stockings and brown leather slippers. Cleaning the mirror, she looked at herself. The gown was creased from being packed, but that could not be helped. She still had a black eye. There was nothing that she could do with her mouse brown hair. She'd had it cropped to her earlobes before she left home. Next trip to market, maybe I'll get some ribbons, she thought grimly, running a comb through her hair. Some nice, bright ribbons. She grinned at her own folly. Hadn't she learned by now that the first thing a boy grabbed in a fight was hair? She'd lose chunks of it, or get half choked if she wore ornaments and ribbons. Overhead, a bell clanged 3 times. She winced. The sound was loud. Time, Salma called. If she thought anything of the change in Kel's appearance, she kept it to herself. and so she pointed to yet another piece of writing. Girls can't fight. Selma's mouth twisted wryly. What do they think their mothers do when the lords are at war and a raiding party strikes? Stay in their solars and tat lace? That made Kel smile. My aunt lit barrels of lard and had them catapulted into Scanran ships this summer. As would any delicately reared noblewoman, Selma opened the door. Once they had walked into the hall, she took the key from Kel and went about her business, nodding to the boys as they emerged from their room. Kel stood in front of her door and clasped her hands so that no one could see that they shook. Suddenly she wanted to turn tail and run until she reached home. Wilden was coming down the hall. Boys joined him as he passed, talking quietly. One of them was a boy with white blonde hair and blue eyes, set in a face as rosy-cheeked as a girl's. Kel, seeing the crispness of his movements and a stubbornness around his mouth, guessed that anyone silly enough to mistake that one for a girl would be quickly taught his mistake. A big, cheerful-looking, red-headed boy walked on Wilden's left, joking with a very tall, lanky youth. A step behind the blonde page, and Wilden came a tall boy who walked with a lion's arrogance. He was brown-skinned and black-eyed, his nose proudly arched. A Bazir tribesman from the southern desert, Kel guessed. She noticed several other Bazir among the pages, but none looked as kingly as this one. When the training master halted, there were only 5 people left in front of the doors, on both sides in front of him, 4 boys and Kel. Her next-door neighbor, a brown-haired boy liberally sprinkled with freckles, bowed to Wilden. Kel and the others did the same. Then Kel wondered if she ought to have curtsied. She let it go. To do so now, after bowing, would just make her look silly. Wilden looked at each of them in turn, his eyes resting the longest on Kel. Don't think you'll have an easy time this year. You will work hard. You'll work when you're tired, when you're ill, and when you think you can't possibly work anymore. You'll have one more day to laze. Your sponsor will show you around this palace and collect those things which the crown supplies to you. The day after that, we begin. You, he pointed to a boy with the reddest, straightest hair Kel had ever seen. Your name and the holding of your family. The boy stammered. Merrick, sir, my lord. Merrick of Hollyrose. He had pale blue eyes and a long, broad nose. His skin had only the barest summer tan. The training master looked at the pages around him. Which of you older pages will sponsor Merrick and teach him our ways? Please, Lord Wilden. Kel was unable to see the owner of the voice and the knot of boys who stood at Wilden's back. We're kinsmen, Merrick and I. And kinsmen should stick together. Well said, Falron of King's Reach. A handsome, dark-haired boy came to stand with Merrick, smiling at the redhead. Wilden pointed to the freckled lad, Esmond of Nicoline, who was taken into the charge of Cleon of Kennan, the big redhead. Blonde and impish, Quindin of Marty's Hill was sponsored by the regal-looking Bazir, Zahir ibn Ahaz. The next pairing was the most notable. Grand Prince Ruald, the 12-year-old heir to the throne, chose to show Seaver of Tassride around. Seaver, whose dark complexion and coal-black eyes and hair suggested Bazir ancestors, stared at Ruald nervously, but relaxed when the prince rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. Only Kel remained. Wilden demanded, Your name and your fief? She gulped. Keldry of Mindolin. Who will sponsor her? Asked Wilden. The handsome Zahir looked at her and sniffed. Girls have no business in the affairs of men. This one should go home. He glared at Kel, who met his eyes calmly. Lord Wilden shook his head. We are not among the Bazir tribes, Zahir ibn Alhaz. Moreover, I requested a sponsor, not an opinion. He looked at the other boys. Will no one offer, he asked. No beginner may go unsponsored. Look at her. Kel heard a boy murmur. She stands there like a lump. The blonde youth at Wilden's side raised a hand. May I, my lord? He asked. Lord Wilden stared at him. You, Jornstone Mountain? The youth bowed. I'd be pleased to teach the girl all she needs to know of life in the page's wing. Kel eyed him, suspicious. From the way a few older pages giggled, she suspected Joran might plan to chase her away, not show her around. She looked at the training master, expecting him to agree with the blonde page. Instead, Lord Wilden frowned. I had hoped for another sponsor, he commented stiffly. You should employ your spare hours in the improvement of your classwork and your writing skills. I thought Joran hated, someone whispered. "Shut up," another boy hissed. Kel looked at the flagstones under her feet. Now she was fighting to hide her embarrassment, but she knew she was failing. Any Yamani would see her shame on her features. She clasped her hands before her and schooled her features to smoothness. "I'm a rock," she thought. "I'm a stone." "I believe I can perfect my studies and sponsor the girl," Joran said respectfully. "And since I'm the only volunteer—" "Suppose I'm being rash and peculiar again," someone remarked in a drawling voice. "But if it means helping my friend Joran improve his studies, well, I'll just have to sacrifice myself. There's nothing I won't do to further the cause of book learning among my peers." Everyone turned towards the speaker, who stood at the back of the group. Seeing him clearly, Cal thought that he was too old to be a page. He was tall, fair-skinned, and lean, with emerald eyes and light brown hair that swept back from a widow's peak. Lord Wilden absently rubbed the arm he kept tucked in a sling. "You volunteer, Nealon of Queen's Cove." The youth bowed jerkily. "That I do, your worship, sir." There was the barest hint of a taunt in Nealon's educated voice. "Sponsor should be a page in his second year at least," Wilden informed Nealon, "and you will mind your tongue." "I know I only joined this little band in April, your lordship," the youth Nealon remarked cheerily, "but I have lived at the court almost all of my 15 years. I know the palace and its ways, and unlike Jordan, I need not worry about my academics." Cal stared at the youth. Had he always been mad, or did a few months under Wilden do this to him? She had just arrived, and she knew better than to bait the training master. Wilden's eyebrows snapped together. "You have been told to mind your manners, Page Nealon. I will have an apology for your insolence." Nealon bowed deeply. "An apology for general insolence, your lordship, or some particular offense?" "1 week scrubbing pots," ordered Lord Wilden. "Be silent." Nealon threw out an arm like a player making a dramatic statement. "How can I be silent and yet apologize?" 2 weeks. Felidry was forgotten as Wilden concentrated on the green-eyed youth. The first duty for anyone in service to the crown is obedience. "And I am a terrible obeyer," retorted Nealon. "All these inconvenient arguments spring to my mind, and I just have to make them." 3, Wilden said tightly. "Neil, shut it," someone whispered. I could learn," Kel squeaked. No one heard. She cleared her throat and repeated, "I can learn it on my own." The boys turned to stare. Wilden glanced at her. "What did you say?" "I'll find my way on my own," Kel repeated. "No one has to show me. I'll probably learn better poking around." She knew that wasn't the case. Her father had once referred to the palace as a miserable rat warren, but she couldn't let this mad boy get himself deeper in trouble on her account. Nealon stared at her, winged brows raised. "When I require your opinion," began Wilden, his dark eyes snapping. "It's no trouble," Nealon interrupted. "None at all. Demoiselle Felidry, my lord, I apologize for my wicked tongue and dreadful manners. I shall do my best not to encourage her to follow my example." Wilden, about to speak, seemed to think better of what he meant to say. He waited a moment and then said, "You are her sponsor, then. Now, enough time has been wasted on foolishness. Supper." He strode off, pages following like ducklings in their mother's wake. When the hall cleared, only Nealon and Felidry were left. Nealon stared at the girl, his slanting eyes taking her in. Seeing him up close at last, Kel noticed that he had a willful face with high cheekbones and arched brows. "Believe me, you wouldn't have liked Joran as a sponsor," Nealon informed her. "He'd drive you out in a week. With me, at least, you might last a while, even if I am the bottom of Lord Wilden's list. Come on." He strode off. Kel stayed where she was. Halfway down the hall, Nealon realized that she was not behind him. When he turned and saw her still in front of her room, he sighed gustily and beckoned. Kel remained where she was. Finally, he stomped back up to her. "What part of 'come on' was unclear, Paige?" "Why do you care if I last a week or longer?" she demanded. "Queen's Cove is a ducal house. Mindelin's just a barony, and a new one at that. Nobody cares about Mindelin. We aren't related, and our fathers aren't friends, so who am I to you?" Nealon stared at her. "Direct little thing, aren't you?" Kel crossed her arms over her chest and waited. The talkative boy didn't seem to have much patience. He would wear out before she did in a waiting contest. Nealon sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. "Look, you heard me say I've lived in court almost all my life, right?" Kel nodded. "Well, think about that. I've lived at court, and my father's the chief of the realm's healers. I've spent time with the queen and quite a few of the queen's riders and the king's champion. I've watched Lady Alana fight for the crown. I saw Her Majesty and some of the ladies fight in the Immortals' War. I know that women can be warriors. If that's the life you want, then you ought to have the same chance to get it as anyone else who's here. He stopped and then shook his head with a rueful smile. I keep forgetting. I'm not in a university debate. Sorry about the speech. Can we go eat now? Cal nodded again. This time, when he strode off down the hall, she trotted to keep up with him. When they passed through the intersection of halls, Neelan pointed. Note that stairwell. Don't let anyone tell you that it's a shortcut to the mess or the classrooms. It heads straight downs and ends on the lower levels, underground. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. Yes, sir. Neelan halted. Was that meant to be funny? No, sir, Cal replied, happy to stop and catch her breath. Neelan walked as he spoke, briskly. Neelan threw up his hands and resumed his course. Finally, they entered a room filled with noise. To Cal, it seemed as if every boy in the world was here, yelling and jostling around rows of long tables and benches. She came to a halt, but Neelan beckoned her to follow. He led her to stacks of trays, plates, napkins, and cutlery, grabbing what he needed. Copying him, Cal soon had a bowl of soup, thick with leeks and barley, big slices of ham, a crusty roll still hot from the oven, saffron rice studded with raisins and almonds. She had noticed pitchers of liquids, bowls of fruits, honey pots, and platters of cheese were already on the table. As they stopped, looking for a place to sit, the racket faded. Eyes turned their way. Within seconds, she could hear the whispers. Look, the girl, it's her. One clear voice exclaimed, Who cares? She won't last. Kel bit her lip and stared at her tray. Stone, she thought in Yamani. I am stone. Neelan gave no sign of hearing, but marched towards the seats at the end of one table. As they sat across from one another, the boys closest to them moved. 2 seats beside Neelan were left empty, and 3 next to Cal. This is nice, Neelan remarked cheerfully. He put his food on the table before him and shoved his tray into the gap between him and the next boy. Usually it's impossible to get a bit of elbow room here. Someone rapped on a table. Lord Wilden stood alone at a lectern in the front of the room. The boys and Kel got to their feet as Wilden raised his hands. To Mithros, god of warriors and of truth, and to the great mother goddess, we give thanks for their bounty, he said. We give thanks and praise, responded his audience. We ask the guidance of Mithros in these uncertain times, when change threatens all that is time-honored and true. May the God's light show us the path back to the virtues of our Father and an end to uncertain times. We ask those of Mithros, god of the sun. So mote it be, intoned the pages. Wilden lowered his hands, and the boys dropped back into their seat. Kel, frowning, was less quick to sit. Had Lord Wilden been talking about her? Don't let his prayers bother you, Neelan told her, using his belt knife to cut his meat. My father says he's done nothing but whine about the changes in Tortle since the king and queen were married. Eat. It's getting cold. Kel took a few bites. After a minute, she asked, Neelan. He put down his fork. It's Neil. My least favorite aunt calls me Neelan. How did his lordship get those scars, she inquired, and why is his arm in this sling? Neil raised his brows. Didn't you know? If I knew I wouldn't ask, Kel thought irritably, but she kept her face blank. Neelan glanced at her and then shook his head and continued. In the war, a party of centaurs and Huroks. Her what? Asked Kel, interrupting him. Huroks. Winged horses, claws, fangs, very nasty. They attacked the royal nursery. The stump. The what? Kel asked, interrupting again. She felt as if he were speaking a language that she only half understood. Neil sighed. There was a wicked gleam in his green eyes. I call him the stump because he's so stiff. He might be right, but he wasn't very respectful, thought Kel. She wouldn't say so, however. She wasn't exactly sure, but probably it would be just as disrespectful to scold her sponsor, particularly one who was 5 years older than her. Anyway, Lord Wilden fought off the Huroks and the centaurs by himself. He saved Prince Liam, Prince Jason, and Princess Leanne. In the fight, the Huroks raked him. My father managed to save the arm, but Wilden's going to have pain from it for all his life. He's a hero, then, breathed Kel, looking at Wilden with new respect. Oh, he's as brave can be, Neil reassured her. That doesn't mean he isn't a stump. He fell silent, and Kel concentrated on her supper. Abruptly, Neil said, "You aren't what was expected." "How so?" She cut up her meat. "Oh, well, you're big for a girl. I have a 10-year-old sister who's a hand-width shorter. And you seem rather quiet. I guess I thought the girl who would follow in Lady Alana's footsteps would be more like her." Kel shrugged. "Will I get to meet the lioness?" She tried not to show that she would do anything to meet her hero. Neil ran his fork along the edges of his plate, not meeting Kel's eyes. "She isn't often at court. Either she's in the field, dealing with lawbreakers, or immortals, or she's home with her family." A bell chimed. The pages rose to carry their empty trays to long windows at the back of the room, turning them over to the kitchen help. "Come on, let's get rid of the stuff, and I'll start showing you around." Selma found them as they were leaving the mess hall. She drew Kel aside and gave her 2 keys. One was brass, the other iron. "I'm the only one with copies of these," Selma told her quietly. "Even the cleaning staff will need me to let them in. Both keys are special. To open your door, put the brass one in the lock, turn it left, and whisper your name. When you leave, turn the key left again. The iron key is for the bottom set of shutters. It works the same as the door key. Lock the shutters every time you leave, or the boys will break in that way. Leave the upper shutters open for ventilation. Only a monkey could climb through those. Don't worry if any of the boys can pick locks. Anyone who tries will be sprayed in skunk stink. That should make them reconsider." Kel smiled. "Thank you, Salma." The woman nodded to her and Neil and left them. Neil walked over to Kel. "If I can't wreck your room, they'll find other things to do," he murmured. When Kel raised her eyebrows at him, she explained, "I learned to read lips. The masters at the university were always whispering something." Kel tucked the keys into her belt purse. "I'll deal with the other things as they come," she said firmly. "Now where to?" "I'll bet you enjoy the portrait gallery. You're showing visitors around. It's one of the places that they like to go." After leading Kel past a bewildering assortment of salons, libraries, and official chambers, Neil showed her the gallery. He seemed to know a story about every person whose portrait was displayed there. Kel was fascinated by his knowledge of Tortle's monarchs and their families, and he made it sound as if he'd known them all personally, even the most ancient. She stared the longest at the faces of King Jonathan and Queen Fayette. She could see why the queen was called the most beautiful one in Tortle, but even in a painting there was more to her than her looks. The girl saw humor at the back of those level, hazel eyes, and determination in the strong nose and perfectly shaped mouth. "She's splendid," Kel breathed. "She is, but don't say that around the stump," advised Neil. He thinks that she's ruining the country with her community notion that women can fight and her opening schools so that everyone can learn their letters. Anything new gives my Lord of Cavil a nosebleed. "Still determined to go to war with a training master, Neilin?" inquired a soft, whispery voice behind Kel. She whirled, startled, and found she was staring at an expanse of pearly gray material, as nubbly as if it were a mass of tiny beads melted together. She stumbled back one step and then another. The pearly gray expanse turned dark gray at the edges. Looking down, Kel saw long, slender legs ending in lengthy digits, each tipped with a silver claw. She backed up yet another step and tilted her head most of the way up. The creature was fully 7 feet tall, not counting the long tail that it used to balance itself, and it was viewing her with fascination. Its large gray slit pupilled eyes regarded her over a short, lipless muzzle. Kel's jaw dropped. "You're staring, Middlin," Neil said dryly. "As am I," the creature remarked in that ghostly voice. "Will you introduce us?" "Taka, this is Keldry of Midland," said Neil. Taka is a basilisk. He's also one of our instructors in the ways of the immortal." Kel had seen immortals other than the spiderin on the riverbank, but she had never been this close to one. And he was to be one of her teachers? "We basilisks are travelers and gossips," Taka remarked as if he had read her mind. "I earn my keep here by educating those who desire a more precise knowledge of those immortals who have chosen to settle in the human realms." "Yes, sir," Kel said, breathless. She started to curtsy, remembered that a page bowed, and tried to do both. Neil braced her before she could topple over. Once she had regained her balance, the red-faced Kel bowed properly. "I'm pleased to meet you, Keldry of Midland," the basilisk told her, as if he hadn't noticed her clumsiness. "I shall see you both the day after tomorrow." With a nod to Kel and to Neil, he walked out of the gallery, tail daintily raised. Neil sighed. We better get back to our rooms. Tomorrow's a busy day. He led her back to her room, pointing out his own as they passed. We'll meet in the mess hall in the morning, he told her. Kel used the key as had directed and entered her room. Everything was in place, her bed freshly made up, curtains and draperies hung. A faint scent of paint still drifted from the walls. Gods of fire and ice bless my new home, she whispered in Yamani. Keep my will burning as hot as the heart of a volcano and as hard and implacable as a glacier. A wave of homesickness suddenly caught her. She wished she could hear her mother's low, soothing voice or listen to her father read from one of his books. Emotion is weakness, Kel told herself, quoting her Yamani teachers. I must be as serene as a lake on a calm day. It was hard to control her feelings when so much was at stake and she was so far from home. But control her feelings she would. If anyone here thought to run her off, they would find that she was tougher than expected. She was here to stay. To prove it, she carefully unpacked each porcelain lucky cat and set it on her mantelpiece. Only when she had placed each of them just so did she scrub her face and put on her nightgown. Climbing into bed, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She imagined a lake, its surface as smooth as glass. This is my heart, she thought. This is what I strive to be. We'll pick up tomorrow with Chapter 3, The Practice Courts. We've been reading the first book of the Protector of the Small series, The First Test. This book is by Tamora Pierce and is published by Random House, New York. My name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon.